The Galactic Empire was vast, stretching across thousands of star systems, with a technology that outclassed anything found on lesser planets. Their ships were the size of moons, and their weapons could reduce entire cities to ash in mere seconds. The Empire ruled with an iron fist, conquering planet after planet, subjugating alien species, and turning once proud civilizations into servile colonies. Their power was unrivaled, and they saw no challenge in expanding further into the cosmos. The Emperor and his Council of Generals had long viewed Earth with disdain. The small, blue planet, tucked away in a relatively insignificant part of the galaxy, had been catalogued as home to primitive creatures. The idea that such a planet could harbor anything dangerous or threatening was laughable. The most dangerous animals Earth had were mere large predators, capable only of basic violence and territorial disputes. The lion, the shark, the bear. These creatures were seen as little more than pests to the Empire's supreme forces. At a High Council meeting, the generals discussed the next phase of their campaign to expand their dominance. One general, a particularly arrogant and young leader named Vrax, suggested Earth as their next target. He spoke of its native wildlife, offering little more than a dismissive chuckle. "Earth is a relic," Vrax said, his voice dripping with confidence. "I've reviewed all the data from our scouts. It's nothing but a cesspool of weak creatures, large cats, wolves, bears, nothing a standard Empire force can't crush in moments." The Emperor himself, sitting at the far end of the room, leaned forward, a smug smile on his face. His empire had never been challenged by any species. Each conquest was met with swift victory, and he couldn't see why Earth would be any different. "Indeed," the Emperor said, his voice smooth but laced with condescension. "I remember reading about Earth's apex predators. Lions, tigers, and the like. Pathetic creatures. There's no reason to waste more than a handful of soldiers on this insignificant world. It would be a simple affair." Another general, Lord Varkes, chimed in, echoing Vrax's sentiments. "I find it amusing, the thought of Earth's predators. No species with such primitive instincts could possibly stand a chance against our weaponry." The room erupted in laughter, the generals shaking their heads in amusement. The Emperor allowed himself a smirk, pleased with the consensus. They were all in agreement. Earth's predators were no threat. And why should they be? The Empire had annihilated entire civilizations with ease. What were a few overgrown creatures on a backwater planet? "We will send a small reconnaissance team," the Emperor decided. "Perhaps have them bring back some of the so-called dangerous specimens, just for curiosity's sake. I trust they will find nothing worth our attention." Vrax was eager to prove his point. "I volunteer for the mission, Your Majesty. It would be a trivial matter. We will scout the planet, identify the predators, and return in no time. I have no doubt we will come across nothing but relics of an ancient and irrelevant world." The Emperor nodded, a dismissive gesture. "Go then, Vrax. Bring back your samples and see for yourself. But be quick about it. We have much more pressing matters." Vrax's team was assembled, a group of elite soldiers armed with the Empire's finest technology. Their suits were near invulnerable, and their weapons could melt steel with ease. They were ready to encounter Earth's so-called predators, and to show them the power of the Galactic Empire. As their ship left the Empire's capital, the crew remained unconcerned. They laughed amongst themselves, making bets on which of Earth's creatures would be the first to surrender to their superior force. They joked about the ease of their mission, imagining that Earth's largest predators would flee in fear at the sight of their advanced technology. They arrived in Earth's atmosphere without a hitch, the scout ship descending into a lush savanna filled with tall grass and scattered trees. The landscape was picturesque, nothing like the vast industrial worlds the Empire was used to. It seemed almost quaint. They landed without any trouble, taking careful scans of the surrounding area. To the Empire's sensors, there was nothing but primitive wildlife roaming the land. Vrax grinned as he stepped out of the ship. "It's just as we thought. Nothing to worry about." He adjusted his helmet and motioned to the soldiers. "Let's see what these so-called predators are made of." Their first encounter was with a small group of wolves. As they approached, the creatures growled, baring their teeth in warning. The soldiers did not hesitate. A quick blast from their weapons sent the wolves scattering. No blood was spilled, not even a scratch was made on the soldiers' armor. The wolves had no chance. Pathetic, one of the soldiers muttered. They moved on, confident that Earth's predators were nothing more than animals who could not match the Empire's superiority. They encountered a larger predator next, a pride of lions lounging in the sun. The lions barely stirred as the soldiers approached. Vrax was eager to demonstrate the Empire's might. "Observe, gentlemen," he said with a sneer. "These kings of the jungle are no match for us." The soldiers raised their weapons, and in seconds, the lions were scattered, retreating into the brush, their roars nothing more than a feeble attempt at resistance. It was all too easy. Another enemy dispatched with little effort. Vrax's crew continued their trek across the savannah, encountering a few more creatures, none of which posed a threat. The soldiers were growing more confident with each passing moment, joking amongst themselves about how they would capture Earth's dangerous creatures and bring them back as trophies for the Emperor. They had seen no signs of real resistance. As they moved deeper into the wilds of Earth, however, something felt different. There was a low, guttural sound from the underbrush, a disturbance. One of the soldiers, a seasoned veteran, raised his hand, signaling for the group to stop. "What's that?" the soldier whispered. The others fell silent, their eyes scanning the terrain. In the distance, moving swiftly and with purpose, was a creature unlike any they had encountered so far. It was small, much smaller than the predators they had faced, but there was something about its movements that seemed wrong. Something primal. Vrax squinted, watching it approach. "A rodent," he muttered. "It's so insignificant." But as it neared, the creature did something unexpected. It charged. With a speed and ferocity that seemed impossible for its size, it hurtled toward the group, its tiny body radiating a terrifying energy. The soldier closest to it barely had time to raise his weapon before the creature lunged, attacking with ferocity that no one could have predicted. Before they could react, the creature had taken down the soldier, attacking with a series of rapid, brutal strikes. It wasn't a rodent. It was something else entirely, something they had grossly underestimated. Something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The creature was a honey badger. Vrax stared in disbelief as the soldiers scrambled to defend themselves. This was no longer a joke. The arrogance that had defined them from the beginning began to crack. The scout team, now on edge after their first encounter with the honey badger, quickly realized that their initial assumptions about Earth's predators had been tragically misguided. Vrax and his soldiers were accustomed to facing powerful, intelligent threats, beings that could calculate, strategize, and engage in complex warfare. They had never before encountered a creature that fought with such pure, unrelenting savagery, driven by nothing more than instinct and an unyielding will to survive. The honey badger had shown no fear, no hesitation, and no respect for their technology or weapons. Vrax stood frozen, his eyes locked on the body of the fallen soldier, now mangled by the creature's relentless assault. The rest of the team quickly regrouped, forming a defensive perimeter as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. The honey badger, however, was not finished. It continued its advance, its eyes locked on the next target with a cold, calculating focus. "Engage it," Vrax ordered, his voice shaky but determined. His soldiers obeyed, raising their blasters and firing at the creature. The shots hit, but the honey badger was relentless. Its thick, tough skin absorbed the energy blasts with minimal effect, and it barely flinched as it charged again, its claws flashing in the air. Vrax's soldiers fired again, but their aim was thrown off by the honey badger's unpredictable movements. The creature dodged, weaving through the blasts with ease, moving faster than they had expected for its small size. It was a blur of motion, striking, clawing, biting with ferocity that would have been unimaginable for such a small animal. It was as if the honey badger didn't care about its own survival, only about inflicting as much damage as possible. One soldier found himself too slow to react. The honey badger lunged, sinking its teeth into the soldier's armored boot and ripping it clean off. The soldier screamed in pain as the creature tore into him, its tiny but powerful jaws working with surgical precision. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. Retreat. Retreat. Vrax shouted, panic seeping into his voice for the first time. But the retreat was not so simple. The honey badger was everywhere, attacking from every direction, relentless in its pursuit. The soldiers, usually calm and collected, found themselves scrambling, fumbling with their weapons, unable to regain control of the situation. In the chaos, a second soldier was taken down. The creature moved too quickly for anyone to react, its attacks swift and brutal. It seemed to be everywhere at once, darting in and out, striking with brutal efficiency. The soldiers, despite their superior technology, were powerless against the sheer unpredictability of the honey badger. The creature didn't follow any pattern. They couldn't anticipate its next move, couldn't formulate a plan to counter it. It was chaos. Cover the ship. Get back to the ship, Vrax ordered, his voice sharp with panic. They had to escape. They had underestimated Earth's wildlife, and now they were paying the price for their arrogance. But it was already too late. As the team attempted to regroup and make their way back to the ship, the honey badger pressed its attack. It was relentless, moving in from all sides, cutting off any escape route. The soldiers fired at it again and again, but each shot seemed to have little effect. Its thick fur and tough skin absorbed their blasts, and the creature showed no signs of slowing down. One soldier made a last-ditch attempt to stop it, charging at the honey badger with a stun grenade in hand. He was quick, but not quick enough. The honey badger ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the explosion. In the chaos that followed, the soldier was taken down, his screams echoing through the savannah as the creature tore into him. Vrax's mind raced. He had heard the stories, of course, tales of the honey badger's legendary ferocity. But nothing could have prepared him for this. He had thought it was just a myth, a bit of exaggeration. But now, standing in the middle of this bloodbath, he realized that those stories were the truth. The realization hit him like a hammer. The honey badger was not just a small animal, it was a force of nature. It didn't care about technology, didn't care about superior weapons. It fought for survival, and it would do anything to ensure it won. The Galactic Empire had never faced anything like this before. There were no tactics, no counters, no quick solutions. The honey badger's fight was primal, raw, and absolutely unforgiving. Pull back. Vrax screamed, his voice cracking. Get to the ship, now. But it was already too late. The honey badger had flanked them. It was already inside the perimeter, charging towards the ship, moving too fast for anyone to react. The soldiers raised their weapons one last time, but their shots went wide. The creature was too fast, too unpredictable. A soldier tried to make a last stand, aiming his blaster at the approaching honey badger. He fired point-blank, but the shot barely fazed the creature. In an instant, the honey badger was on him, tearing through his suit with horrifying efficiency. The soldier's screams echoed across the savannah, and then silence. Vrax, his heart pounding, could only watch as his men were picked off, one by one. His own blaster shook in his hand, but he had no idea how to stop the carnage. The creature was too powerful, too wild, too relentless. And there was nothing they could do. In the distance, the ship was still waiting, but it seemed impossibly far away. They could never reach it in time. Every move they made only seemed to bring them closer to the honey badger, which was now circling, its eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence that seemed to mock them. It was as if it was daring them to make another mistake. Vrax's mind raced as he watched his soldiers fall, one after another. The Empire had sent its finest warriors to Earth, but they had failed. Not due to lack of strength or technology, but because they had miscalculated. They had underestimated a force of nature, a creature driven by an instinct so primal that it could not be bargained with, outsmarted, or defeated. As the last of his soldiers fell, Vrax made a decision. He turned and ran. He would live to fight another day, but not here, not now. He was no coward, but there was no honor in fighting a battle that could not be won. With his heart pounding in his chest, Vrax sprinted towards the ship, his pulse racing, his mind filled with one overwhelming thought. They had underestimated Earth's creatures, and now they would pay the price for it. Vrax reached the ship with only a handful of soldiers still alive, their armor battered and their bodies bruised. The once confident Imperial force had been reduced to a haggard group, desperate for escape. As he slammed the door shut behind him, he could hear the distant growls of the honey badger, still hunting, still relentless. They had barely made it out, but the sense of victory that should have filled Vrax was absent. Instead, there was only fear, a fear he had never known before. Inside the ship, the crew quickly secured the perimeter, but they were rattled, disoriented by what had just transpired. Vrax paced furiously, his mind racing. How had it gone so wrong? How had a small, seemingly insignificant creature been able to wipe out a force like theirs so efficiently? Report. Vrax snapped, his voice raw. One of the soldiers, a young officer, stumbled over his words. We lost nearly half the team. The honey badger, it just doesn't stop. It's relentless. Our weapons couldn't slow it down. It tore through our armor like paper. Vrax clenched his fists, trying to process the situation. This can't be happening. We're the Empire. Nothing stands against us. We've never faced anything like this, the officer muttered, his voice trembling. It's not just a predator. It's a nightmare. Vrax froze. He could feel the weight of those words. A nightmare. That was the only way to describe it. The honey badger didn't fight like anything he had ever encountered. There was no strategy, no cleverness, no consideration for its own survival. It fought with an abandon that was as terrifying as it was unpredictable. It didn't fight for conquest or dominance. It fought to survive. And that made it more dangerous than anything Vrax had ever faced. He looked at the other soldiers, who were now looking at him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They had all underestimated Earth's creatures, but it wasn't just the honey badger that was the problem. It was everything about this planet. The predators were more than just animals. They were fighters, driven by instincts far more primal and unrelenting than anything the Empire had prepared for. The soldiers had come here expecting an easy mission, but they were facing a world where survival came first, and everything else was secondary. Vrax's thoughts were interrupted by the ship's communication system. A transmission from the Emperor's command center crackled through, the Emperor's voice calm, but with an edge of impatience. Vrax, report. Have you secured the specimens? What is the status of the mission? Vrax's heart sank. He had failed. The mission was a disaster, and there was no way to spin it into something palatable. He couldn't report victory. He couldn't report conquest. The only thing he could report was that they had been humbled by Earth's creatures. Your Majesty, Vrax began, his voice wavering, we encountered unexpected resistance. The honey badger, it's unlike anything we've ever faced. Our weapons had little effect. We lost soldiers, and the remaining forces are in no condition to continue. We're returning to base immediately. There was a long pause, followed by the Emperor's voice, tinged with disbelief. You're telling me that one creature, a single predator, has caused this much damage? This is inconceivable. You are the Empire's finest. How could you allow this to happen? Vrax's fists clenched at the harsh words. He had no answers. There was no way to explain how they had failed so utterly. They had brought advanced technology, an elite team, and yet they had been beaten by something that shouldn't have been a challenge. The honey badger had defied all logic, all expectations. It was the very definition of unpredictability. I don't have an explanation, Your Majesty, Vrax admitted. It's as if it doesn't even care about its own life. It doesn't follow any logic, any pattern. It fights with the ferocity of a creature that has nothing to lose. The Emperor's voice turned colder, the disappointment clear in every word. This is a disgrace, Vrax. The Galactic Empire does not tolerate failure. You are to return immediately and report to the Council. We will discuss your failure. Consider yourself fortunate that you still have a ship to return on. The transmission cut off, and Vrax was left standing in the dead silence of the ship. His soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale. No one spoke. They all understood what this meant. This failure would be a stain on their records, something they would never live down. The Empire would not forgive this. "We can't go back to the Empire like this," one of the soldiers said quietly, his voice filled with defeat. "We've failed. And not just failed. We've been humiliated." A single animal. Vrax turned sharply, his anger flaring. "We're going back. We're going to report. And we'll make sure this never happens again. Do you understand me?" But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't sure what kind of punishment awaited him, but he knew one thing for certain. The Empire would never look at Earth the same way again. It had always been dismissed, always seen as a backwater planet full of primitive life. But now, the galaxy's most powerful empire had been shown just how wrong they were. Earth's creatures were not to be underestimated. They were not mere animals, they were fighters. And if the Empire wanted to conquer Earth, it would have to face something far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. As the ship ascended from Earth's atmosphere, Vrax glanced out at the vast expanse of space, his mind racing. He had learned a hard lesson, one that the Empire would soon be forced to learn as well. There was something about Earth, something raw and primal, that couldn't be ignored. It was a lesson that would echo throughout the Empire for generations. Never underestimate the strength of a world that had survived against all odds. Earth was no longer just a distant, irrelevant planet. It had become a warning. A reminder that no matter how advanced your technology, no matter how vast your empire, there would always be something out there that you could not predict, that you could not conquer. Something that would fight back, just as the honey badger had. As the ship hurtled through space, heading back to the Empire's capital, Vrax's thoughts were consumed with one question. How had they failed so completely? Earth had been written off as a simple mission, a trivial task that would only take a few hours. But now, that trivial mission had turned into a nightmare. The Galactic Empire had been shown its limits, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Vrax had never known failure on this scale, and the shame weighed heavily on him. The very idea of returning empty-handed was unthinkable. The crew sat in silence, some of them nursing injuries, others simply staring out of the viewport, lost in their own thoughts. They had all seen death up close, but never like this. Never from something so small, so primitive, and yet so merciless. The honey badger had not only survived their most advanced weaponry, but it had torn through their forces with an intensity that seemed to come from another world entirely. Vrax slammed his fist into the console, frustration building. "How could this happen?" he muttered under his breath. "We're the most powerful force in the galaxy, and we were outdone by a single creature." His words hung in the air, unanswered. The officers around him said nothing, knowing full well there was no good answer. They were soldiers, trained for combat, equipped with technology that could decimate entire worlds. But nothing had prepared them for the sheer ferocity of Earth's wildlife. The transmission from the Emperor had been curt and cold, as expected. There would be no sympathy for their failure, no understanding of what they had faced. The Emperor did not care for excuses, and certainly not for the loss of soldiers. The Empire had no place for weakness, and to fail in such a manner would cost them dearly. Vrax couldn't help but wonder how the Emperor would react when he heard the full details of the mission. Would he demand an explanation? Would he call for a full-scale invasion of Earth, hoping to avenge their embarrassment? But even that idea seemed impossible now. Vrax had seen enough to know that Earth was not a world that could be conquered in the way the Empire had conquered others. The creatures there, whether they were honey badgers or anything else, fought with a will to survive that the Empire had never encountered. There was no easy victory to be had here. Earth would not fall like so many other planets had. As they entered the Empire's spaceport, Vrax's heart sank. The towering spires of the capital were imposing, a constant reminder of the Empire's power. And yet, in this moment, it all felt hollow. The Empire had faced a blow to its pride, and Vrax was the one to deliver the news. The soldiers disembarked, their armor scratched and worn, their faces grim. Vrax led them through the hallways of the Imperial headquarters, his mind still racing. There was nothing he could say that would justify their failure. The Emperor had already made his judgment. All that remained was to face the consequences. Inside the Emperor's throne room, the atmosphere was tense. The Emperor sat upon a seat of power, his piercing eyes fixed on Vrax. The room was filled with the council, each member awaiting the report. Vrax stood before them, his shoulders squared, though he could feel the weight of their gazes bearing down on him. He had led them into this disaster, and now he had to explain it. Vrax, the Emperor's voice was like ice, cold and unforgiving. Explain yourself. You had one task, to secure specimens from Earth. You have failed. Not only have you failed, but you have embarrassed the Empire. How do you justify this? Vrax swallowed hard. He had prepared for this moment, but the reality was far worse than he had imagined. Your Majesty, he began, his voice steady but tinged with regret, we encountered resistance unlike anything we've faced before. The honey badger, it was a creature unlike any we've encountered. Our weapons were ineffective. We underestimated it, and we underestimated Earth's wildlife as a whole. They don't fight like any species we've encountered. They fight purely for survival, and they do not care for their own lives. The honey badger was just the beginning. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, and the room fell silent. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared interrupt. They were all waiting for the Emperor's response. You failed because you underestimated Earth, the Emperor said slowly, his voice dripping with disdain. You assumed that a world full of primitive creatures would pose no threat. But you forgot one thing, Vrax. The creatures of Earth have survived through sheer willpower, through an instinct that we, with all our technology and might, cannot replicate. You are not dealing with an enemy that values life as we do. You were dealing with something much more primal. Vrax nodded, but inside, a sense of dread was growing. He had never heard the Emperor speak like this before. There was something in his voice, a warning that Vrax couldn't ignore. The Emperor wasn't just angry, he was disappointed, perhaps more so than Vrax had ever seen. The Empire had been made to look weak, and that was a mistake that would not go unpunished. We will not tolerate such failure, the Emperor continued. The loss of soldiers is bad enough, but the humiliation cannot stand. I had hoped this mission would be an easy one. I had hoped Earth would be a simple conquest. But now, I see the truth. It is not Earth that must be conquered. It is its creatures that must be understood. Vrax's mind raced. What did the Emperor mean by that? Understand the creatures? The honey badger was a predator, driven by raw survival instincts. What could there possibly be to understand about it? How could anyone hope to control such a thing? Prepare for a new mission. The Emperor's voice cut through his thoughts. You will return to Earth, not to conquer it, but to study it. We must understand the essence of these creatures, how they survive. Only then can we learn how to neutralize them. Vrax's stomach churned. The idea of returning to Earth, a planet that had so thoroughly humiliated them, was unbearable. But there was no choice. The Emperor had spoken, and his word was law. There would be no peace until Earth was subdued, and the honey badger was but a symbol of that world's unyielding nature. As Vrax left the throne room, his thoughts remained heavy with the Emperor's command. They had failed because they had underestimated Earth's resilience. But the Empire would return, and this time, the mission would be different. This time, they would not just conquer Earth, they would break it, understand it, and make it bow to their will. The honey badger would be nothing but a stepping stone on their path to domination. The question now wasn't whether the Empire could win. It was how much more the honey badger and Earth's creatures would make them bleed before they were finally brought to heel.